The auction hall smelled like old wood and desperation. I stood on the platform with my wrists bound in ceremonial rope, the kind that left no marks but announced ownership louder than any chain. Around me, faces blurred into a single mass of judgment. Omegas weren't supposed to end up here. We had families, packs, protection, but I had none of those things anymore. The auctioneer's voice droned on, listing qualities I didn't recognize in myself. Compliant, fertile, presentable. Each word felt like a stone added to a weight I'd been carrying for months. I kept my eyes on the floor, on the worn grooves in the wood where countless others had stood before me. I wondered if they'd survived what came next. 50,000, someone called from the back. I didn't look up. Looking made it real. 60. The numbers climbed. My stomach twisted tighter with each bid. I'd heard stories about auction buyers. Wealthy alphas looking for status symbols. Or worse, pack enforcers seeking disposable labor. The Eastern Territories were known for their cruelty to unbonded Omegas. I'd spent 3 weeks in the holding cells beneath this building, listening to others whisper about their fates. 200,000. The room fell silent. That voice cut through the murmur like a blade through silk. I knew that voice. Everyone in the Northern Territories knew that voice. My head jerked up before I could stop myself. He stood at the back of the hall, partially shadowed by the entrance archway. King Hadrian Morven, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories. Even from a distance, his presence pressed down on the room like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell just past his collar, and eyes that looked black in the dim light. He wore no crown, no ceremonial robes, just dark clothing that made him look more like an executioner than royalty. He was staring directly at me, my breath caught. Not the poetic kind of catching that people wrote about in romance stories. The kind where your lungs forget how to function and your body screams at you to run even though there's nowhere to go. 200,000 going once, the auctioneer said, his voice climbing with barely concealed excitement. An Alpha King didn't attend auctions. This would be talked about for years. Twice. I should look away. Every instinct told me to lower my eyes, to show submission, to make myself smaller. But I couldn't. Hadrian Morven's gaze held mine like a hand around my throat, sold. The rope around my wrists was cut. New bonds were brought forward, leather this time, stamped with the northern crest, a wolf's head surrounded by thorns. I'd seen that symbol my entire life. It hung in every public building, was carved into every border stone, appeared on every official document that governed our lives, every official document that had destroyed mine. An attendant led me down from the platform. My legs felt disconnected from my body. The crowd parted as we approached the Alpha King. He didn't move, didn't step forward to claim his purchase. He simply waited, watching me stumble toward him like prey walking into a snare. When I was close enough to see his face clearly, I understood why the room had gone so quiet. His expression wasn't hungry or victorious or even curious. It was cold, calculated. This wasn't impulse or desire. This was strategy. Do you know who I am? He asked. His voice was quieter than I expected. Controlled. Yes, Your Majesty. Do you know why I bought you? I shook my head. The leather bonds felt heavier than the rope had been. You will. He turned to the attendant. Take her to the Northern Estate, the East Wing. She's not to interact with the other Omegas or leave the grounds. Yes, Your Majesty. He looked at me one more time. Your name? Isla. It came out barely above a whisper. Something flickered across his face. Recognition? Anger? It was gone too quickly to read. Isla Merrick. He knew my full name, my family name. The name I'd stopped using 6 months ago when the council had stripped it from the records. You remember, I said, not a question. I remember everything. He stepped closer. This close, I could smell pine and winter air, and something darker underneath, especially debts. Then he was gone, walking out of the auction hall with long strides that forced everyone to scatter from his path. I stood frozen, the attendant's hand on my elbow, trying to process what had just happened. Hadrian Morven had bought me, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories. The man who ruled over 16 packs and controlled more land than any other Alpha in recorded history. The man whose counsel had signed the order that took everything from me, and he'd called it a debt. The journey to the northern estate took 4 hours by motor coach. The attendant, a middle-aged beta woman named Marin, didn't speak except to offer water I couldn't drink and food I couldn't stomach. I spent the time staring out the window, watching the landscape shift from the gray industrial outskirts of the auction district to the dense pine forests that marked true northern territory. I'd been born in these forests, spent my entire childhood running through trees just like these. My father had been a pack historian, one of the few positions that allowed for actual scholarship instead of just survival. My mother had worked in the council archives. We lived in a small house on the edge of Morven City, close enough to smell the bakeries in the morning and hear the evening bells. That house was gone now, burned. The official report said faulty wiring. The unofficial whispers said punishment. "We're here," Marin said. The estate sprawled across a cleared hillside like something from an old painting. Stone and timber construction, multiple wings branching off from a central building, windows that reflected the late afternoon sun like closed eyes. It was beautiful in the way that powerful things often were, intimidating and cold, and designed to make you feel small. Marin led me through a side entrance, avoiding the main halls. We climbed 2 flights of stairs and walked down a corridor lined with doors. She stopped at the last one. "This is yours. Bathroom through there. Clothes in the wardrobe. Meals will be brought 3 times daily. You're not to leave without explicit permission from His Majesty."
You cannot.
Am I a prisoner?
You never will.
Marin's expression softened slightly. "You're whatever he decides you are. My advice, don't give him reasons to decide poorly." She left before I could ask what that meant. The room was larger than anywhere I'd lived in the past 6 months. Clean, warm, a bed with actual linens, a desk, a window that overlooked the forest. It felt like a gift and a cage at the same time. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to think through the panic. Hadrian Morven had bought me for revenge. That much was clear. But revenge for what? My family had served the Northern Territories faithfully for 3 generations. My father's research had documented pack history, preserved traditions, kept records that would have been lost. My mother had organized the very archives that housed the laws Hadrian enforced. The laws. My hands started shaking. I pressed them flat against my thighs, trying to steady them. 6 months ago, my father had found something in the archives. Something wrong. He'd brought it to the council, privately, respectfully, through proper channels. He'd asked questions about a specific law, one that governed Omega rights during territorial disputes. The law was old, written in the first years after the territories were established. It had been cited in dozens of judgments, used to settle conflicts, referenced as foundational. My father had discovered it was a forgery. Not the whole law, just key phrases. Additions made decades after the original text, inserted so carefully that no one had noticed. Those phrases had shifted the meaning entirely, had stripped Omegas of protections that were supposed to be absolute. They'd been used to justify seizures, exiles, separations. They'd been used to consolidate power. 3 days after my father presented his findings, our house burned down. Both my parents died in the fire. I survived because I'd been staying with a friend across the city. The council conducted an investigation that lasted exactly 1 week. They declared it an accident, struck my family name from official records, and seized all my father's research for review. No one would hire me after that. No pack would take me in. The whispers followed everywhere. Traitor's daughter, conspiracy theorist, unstable. I'd spent months moving between temporary shelters, burning through what little money I'd had, until there was nothing left but the auction. And now I was here, in the home of the man whose counsel had destroyed everything. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The bonds around my wrists had been removed when we arrived, but I could still feel their weight. Outside, the sun was setting. The room filled with orange light that made everything look like it was on fire. I closed my eyes and tried to remember my father's face, the way he'd looked when he'd shown me the documents. Not triumphant or excited, sad. Like he'd discovered something he wished he could unknow. "This changes everything, Isla," he'd said. "But we have to do this right, through proper channels. We can't give them any excuse." We'd given them no excuse. They'd acted anyway. A knock at the door pulled me back to the present. I sat up quickly, smoothing my hair, trying to look composed. Enter. A different attendant this time, younger. She carried a tray of food and wouldn't meet my eyes. "From His Majesty,"
The king requests
she said,
your immediate presence
setting it
in
on the
royal
desk.
hall. Please do not
"He'll see you
delay."
tomorrow morning. First bell." "What does he want?" "He doesn't share his intentions with us." She turned to leave, then paused. "There are others here. Omegas, staff. Most of them are kind if you get the chance to meet them. But not everyone is happy you're here. Why?" She glanced at the door, nervous. "Because you're in the East Wing. That's where he keeps things he hasn't decided what to do with yet. Important things. Dangerous things." Then she was gone. I looked at the tray. Roasted vegetables, fresh bread, meat that actually smelled like meat instead of preserved rations. My stomach turned over. I couldn't eat. Couldn't think about food when my entire body was vibrating with the need to understand what was happening. Hadrian Morven had bought me for revenge. He knew my name. He remembered. He'd isolated me, claimed me, brought me into his home. But revenge for what? For my father's discovery? That made no sense. If the council wanted to silence the truth, why bring me here? Why not just leave me to disappear into the auction system, sold to some distant pack where I'd never be heard from again? I walked to the window. The forest stretched endlessly, dark and deep. Somewhere out there were the borders of 16 packs, all governed by the same laws, the same corrupted laws. My father had died trying to expose the truth. My mother had died beside him. And I was standing in the home of the man who might have ordered it. The ceiling above me creaked. Footsteps. Someone was in the room directly overhead, walking slowly, back and forth, like they were pacing, like they couldn't sleep either. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and tried to breathe through the fear. Tomorrow morning, first bell, I would face Hadrian Morven. I would look into the eyes of the Alpha King and try to understand why he'd paid 200,000 for a revenge I didn't comprehend. And maybe, I'd finally learn what my father had really uncovered. The footsteps above stopped. The house settled into silence. I stood at the window until the sky went fully dark, watching my reflection slowly appear in the glass. Pale hair falling loose around my shoulders. Eyes that looked too large for my face. Posture that screamed exactly what I was, an Omega alone in a predator's den. But I was also my father's daughter. He'd taught me to look deeper, to question, to never accept easy answers. Hadrian Morven wanted revenge. I wanted truth. Tomorrow, one of us would get what we came for. First bell came before dawn. I'd barely slept, drifting in and out of dreams where the auction platform became a courtroom, and the Alpha King's voice read charges I couldn't hear. When the actual bell rang, a deep, resonant sound that carried through the entire estate, I was already awake, sitting at the desk with my hands folded to stop them from shaking. Marin arrived exactly 3 minutes later. "His Majesty is in the Western study," she said. "No greeting, no pleasantries. You have 10 minutes to make yourself presentable." The clothes in the wardrobe were simple but well made. Practical fabrics in neutral colors. Nothing like the decorative Omega clothing I'd seen in the city, all soft pastels and delicate embroidery designed to signal availability. These were garments meant for function. I chose dark gray pants and a loose cream sweater, pulled my hair back into a braid, and followed Marin into the corridor. The estate was larger than I'd realized. We walked through passages that opened onto interior courtyards, past rooms with closed doors, and others where I glimpsed staff moving purposefully. Everyone we passed lowered their eyes. Not to me, to the space around me, like I was infected with something they didn't want to catch. The Western study occupied a corner tower. Marin knocked twice, received no answer, and pushed the door open anyway. "Isla Merrick, Your Majesty. Leave us." Marin withdrew. The door closed with a sound like a cell locking. Hadrian stood at a window identical to mine, looking out over a different section of forest. He'd changed from yesterday's dark clothing into something more formal, a tailored jacket with the northern crest embroidered at the collar, boots that looked military in their precision. He didn't turn around. "Come here." I crossed the room. Each step felt measured, deliberate. The study was lined with bookshelves, filled with volumes that looked ancient. A large desk dominated the center, its surface covered in papers and maps. On the wall behind it hung a frame, but I couldn't see what it contained from this angle. I stopped 3 feet from him, close enough to obey, far enough to maintain some illusion of safety. Closer. One more step. Now I could smell that same scent from yesterday. Pine and winter, and something underneath that my Omega instincts recognized as dangerous. "Do you know what this estate is called?" he asked, still watching the forest. "No, Your Majesty. Thorn Ridge. Built by my great-grandfather after the territorial wars. He wanted something defensible, remote. Somewhere he could see threats coming from any direction. He finally turned to look at me, somewhere he could keep secrets." His eyes were lighter than I'd thought, not black. Dark gray, like storm clouds. They studied me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "I'm going to ask you questions," he continued. "You're going to answer them truthfully. If you lie, I'll know. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Yes, what?" "Yes, Your Majesty." He moved to the desk, gestured for me to sit in the chair opposite. I obeyed. He remained standing, leaning against the desk edge, arms crossed. The position put him above me, looking down. Deliberate intimidation. "Your father was Garrett Merrick, pack historian. He worked in the council archives for 23 years. 24, I said before I could stop myself. Hadrian's eyebrow lifted slightly. "You're correcting me. You said you wanted truth." Something flickered in his expression. Not anger, something else. 24 years. And your mother was Elena Merrick, archive administrator. They died 6 months ago in a fire ruled accidental. It wasn't accidental. No, he agreed. It wasn't. The admission hit me like cold water. I stared at him, trying to process. "You know?" "I know many things, Isla. What I need to understand is what you know." He leaned forward slightly. "Your father found something. A discrepancy in the territorial law codes. He brought it to the council privately. 3 days later, your house burned." "What did he find?" My throat felt tight. "Why do you care?" "Answer the question." "Why should I?" The words came out sharper than intended. "You're the Alpha King. The council serves you. If my father found something that threatened them, it threatened you. Why would you?" "Because I didn't order the fire." His voice cut through mine. "And I didn't know about the forgery until 2 months after your parents were dead." Forgery. He'd said it. Acknowledged it. "How?" I asked. "Your father kept copies. He wasn't naive enough to trust the council with his only evidence. He sent duplicates to 3 different people. 2 of them burned their sets immediately, too frightened to get involved. The 3rd sent them to me anonymously with a note that said, 'Your kingdom is built on lies.'" He straightened, walked around the desk, and picked up a folder I hadn't noticed. "These." He opened it. Inside were photocopies of old documents, covered in cramped handwriting and official seals. I recognized my father's annotations in the margins. "The Omega Protection Statute of 1847, Hadrian said. Section 7 originally stated that Omegas retained autonomous rights during territorial disputes, including the right to refuse relocation and the right to appeal any Alpha decision affecting their household. Sometime between 1847 and 1870, someone added a clause, a single sentence that changed everything. These protections are void if the Omega is unbonded and the dispute involves territorial sovereignty. I knew this. I'd helped my father trace the insertion, had spent weeks comparing documents. That clause was used to justify forced relocations, I said. When Alphas wanted land and Omegas were in the way. It stripped protection from anyone vulnerable enough to need it most, yes. And it was cited in 47 council rulings over the past century. Rulings that shaped policy, established precedent, created the legal framework we still use. He set the folder down. Your father discovered that one sentence was never part of the original law. Someone added it. Someone with access to the archives and the skill to make it look authentic. Who? That's what I'm trying to find out. He sat in the chair beside mine instead of behind the desk. The shift in position felt significant. Less interrogation, more conference. And that's why you're here. I turned to face him fully. You bought me for revenge, but not against me. No. Against whoever killed your parents and corrupted my kingdom's laws. His jaw tightened. I spent 2 months investigating quietly, following threads, asking questions that made my own council nervous. What I found was a network of alterations spanning decades. Not just the Omega Protection Statute, other laws. Small changes, always subtle. always positioned to consolidate power in specific hands, the council. 3 council members specifically. Edmund Thorne, Minister of Territorial Affairs, Victoria Ashlyn, Head of Legal Documentation, and Marcus Valen, Chief Arbitrator. He stood, began pacing. They've been in power for 30 years. They've shaped every major policy decision in that time. And when your father threatened to expose them, they eliminated him. My hands gripped the chair arms. Then why am I alive? Because killing you would have been too obvious. Your parents' deaths were already suspicious. A third Merrick dying would have raised questions they couldn't afford. He stopped pacing, looked at me directly. So they let you fall through the cracks, took everything from you, made sure you couldn't speak with any credibility, let the system destroy you slowly, until you bought me, until I bought you. He moved back to the desk, picked up another document. The auction was public, attended by representatives from multiple PACs, recorded in official registers. I paid an excessive amount, made a spectacle. Now everyone knows you're here, under my protection, in my estate. The council can't make you disappear without it looking like a direct attack on me. The strategy clicked into place. You're using me as bait. I'm using you as a witness. He held up the document. This is a formal petition to review the Omega Protection Statute. I'm calling for a full council hearing in 3 weeks. Public? Mandatory attendance. I'll present your father's evidence and demand an investigation into how the forgery occurred. They'll deny everything. Of course they will. But they'll also panic. Make mistakes. Desperate people always do. He set the document down. You're going to help me catch them. I should have felt relieved. Should have been grateful that the Alpha King believed me. Was fighting for the same truth my father had died for. But something about this felt wrong, calculated in a way that made my instincts scream. What happens to me after the hearing? I asked. Hadrian's expression didn't change. That depends on what we uncover. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. He moved toward the door. You'll stay in the East Wing. You're not a prisoner, but you're not free to leave the estate grounds. Myron will provide anything you need. In 1 week, you'll begin meeting with my legal advisor to prepare testimony. And until then you survive. The council knows you're here by now. They'll be watching, planning. You're safe within these walls, but that safety is conditional on your cooperation. He opened the door, signaling the conversation was over. I stood, my legs unsteady. Your Majesty, I said. Why should I trust you? He looked at me for a long moment. You shouldn't. Trust is earned, and I haven't earned yours. But we both want the same thing, justice for your parents and truth about these laws. That's enough to work together, even without trust. It was a politician's answer, honest in its dishonesty. I walked past him into the corridor where Myron waited. One more thing, Hadrian called. The law we're challenging, the one that strips Omegas of protection during territorial disputes. It was used 6 months ago to justify seizing your family's property after their deaths. Everything you owned became crown property under that statute. The words hit like a physical blow. You own my home. I own what the council seized using a corrupted law. When that law is overturned, the seizure becomes invalid. He met my eyes. Your cooperation in this hearing benefits both of us. Remember that. The door closed. Myron led me back through the passages in silence. I barely saw where we were going. My mind was spinning, trying to parse everything Hadrian had revealed. He was fighting the council, using my father's evidence, planning a public hearing that could overturn decades of precedent. And he'd bought me not for revenge against my family, but to preserve the only living witness to the forgery. It made sense. It was logical. It fit the facts, but it didn't explain the coldness in his voice, the calculation in his eyes, the way he'd framed everything as strategy rather than justice. We reached my room. Myron opened the door, waited for me to enter. The others, I said. The Omegas who work here. Can I meet them? Not yet. His Majesty wants you isolated until after the hearing. For your protection. Or to control what I know. Myron's expression tightened. Careful, girl. Paranoia won't serve you here. And blind obedience will? She studied me for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was lower. There are 32 Omegas employed on this estate. 28 of them are here because they had nowhere else to go. His Majesty took them in when other packs rejected them, gave them work, shelter, safety. He's not the monster you're imagining. Then why does everyone look at me like I'm contaminated? Because you're involved in council politics. That's dangerous. Not because of you, because of what you represent. She stepped back. Food will arrive in an hour. Try to eat. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in months. I hadn't. But I didn't say that. The door closed. I was alone again. I walked to the window and looked out at the forest. Same trees. Different angle. The sun was fully up now, turning everything golden. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt like I was looking at a painting of beauty rather than experiencing it directly. My father had trusted the council. He'd followed proper channels, believed in the system. And they'd killed him for it. Now the Alpha King was asking me to trust him. To testify publicly. To put myself in the same position that had gotten my parents murdered. But what choice did I have? Go back to the auction? Disappear into some distant pack where I'd spend my life wondering if the truth would ever come out? No. My father had fought for this, had died for this. I owed him more than survival. I owed him vindication. A sound from above made me look up. Those same footsteps from last night, pacing in the room overhead. Slower now. Deliberate. Like whoever was up there was thinking through something difficult. I wondered who else Hadrian kept in the East Wing. What other dangerous, important things required isolation. The footsteps stopped. A door opened. Closed. Silence. I sat at the desk and pulled out a piece of paper from the drawer. Someone had left writing supplies. Pens, blank pages, even a small notebook. Intentional, probably. Everything in this place seemed intentional. I started writing. Not testimony. Not preparation for the hearing. Just memories. My father's face when he'd shown me the documents. The way my mother's hands had trembled when she'd understood what he'd found. The smell of our kitchen on Sunday mornings. The sound of rain on our roof. Small things. True things. Things no law could corrupt or take away. Outside, the forest stretched endlessly. Inside, I filled pages with the only truth I had left. The week passed in strange isolation. Meals arrived on schedule, always more food than I could eat. Marin checked on me twice daily, asked if I needed anything, left before I could ask questions that mattered. The room felt less like shelter and more like a holding cell designed to look comfortable. I spent the time reading. Someone had stocked the shelves with books, histories of the Northern Territories, legal texts, even a few novels I recognized from childhood. I wondered if Hadrian had chosen them himself, or if this was standard provision for East Wing occupants. The footsteps above continued, morning and evening, always the same pattern, pacing, stopping, resuming. On the fourth day, I heard voices. Muffled but distinct, Hadrian's low tone and someone else, higher pitched, arguing maybe. The conversation lasted 10 minutes before a door slammed and silence returned. On the seventh day, everything changed. I was reading when Marin entered without knocking. Her face was tight with something I couldn't identify. Fear, perhaps. Or anger. Get up. You're wanted in the council hall. The hearing isn't for 2 more weeks. This isn't the hearing. Emergency session. The council has called for your immediate appearance. She pulled clothes from the wardrobe. Formal attire, dark and severe. Get dressed. We leave in 5 minutes. My stomach dropped. Why? What happened? His Majesty will explain. Hurry! The council hall occupied the central building's highest floor, a circular room with windows on all sides, and seating arranged in concentric rings descending toward a center platform. I'd seen drawings of it in my father's books, but never imagined I'd stand inside. 50 people were already present when we arrived. Council members in their formal robes sat in the elevated sections. Pack representatives filled the lower rings. And at the very center, on the platform where accused parties traditionally stood, was a small table with a single chair. Hadrian stood beside it, arms crossed, expression unreadable. When he saw me enter, he gestured sharply. Here. Now. I descended the steps with Marin behind me. Every eye in the room tracked my movement. The silence was suffocating. Sit, Hadrian commanded. I sat. He remained standing, positioning himself slightly in front of me. Protective, maybe. Or controlling the visual. Edmund Thorne rose from the council's front row. He was older than I expected, maybe 70, with silver hair and a face carved from disapproval. Your Majesty. This irregularity is noted, bringing an unbonded Omega to an emergency session without prior authorization. The emergency session was your idea, Thorne. I'm simply complying. Hadrian's voice carried easily through the space. You wanted to question her. Here she is. Victoria Ashland stood next. She was younger, 50s perhaps, with sharp features and eyes like calculation itself. We received disturbing information this morning, information that directly concerns this Omega and her presence on Crown property. What information? I asked before Hadrian could speak. The room's attention swung to me. Several council members leaned forward. Victoria smiled. It wasn't kind. Records from the Eastern Territories auction house, specifically documentation regarding your sale. My pulse quickened. I don't understand. The auction house keeps detailed records of all transactions, buyer identity, payment method, stated purpose for purchase. She held up a folder. According to their files, His Majesty paid $200,000 for you and listed the purpose as personal use, extended term. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. I felt heat rise in my face. Personal use is standard language, Hadrian said. His tone hadn't changed, but something had shifted in his posture. It's required terminology for any purchase that isn't immediate resale or pack placement. Quite so, Victoria agreed. However, we also have testimony from 3 auction attendees who report that His Majesty specifically requested private quarters in the East Wing for you. The East Wing, as many here know, is typically reserved for the Alpha King's personal companions. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Are you suggesting... Hadrian started. I'm stating facts, Your Majesty. Victoria's smile widened. You purchased an Omega. You housed her in intimate quarters. You've kept her isolated from all other staff. And now, conveniently, you've announced plans to use her as your key witness in a challenge to council authority. Marcus Valen stood. He was the youngest of the 3, maybe 50, with the kind of face that looked pleasant, until you noticed the coldness behind it. The appearance of impropriety is deeply concerning. If this Omega is providing testimony that serves your political interests while simultaneously serving your personal interests, her credibility becomes questionable. Her credibility? Hadrian's voice dropped dangerously low. You're questioning the credibility of a witness whose parents you murdered? The room erupted. Voices overlapped, some shocked, some angry. Edmund Thorne stood so quickly his chair fell backward. That is an outrageous accusation. We conducted a full investigation into the Merrick fire. It was ruled accidental by independent examiners. Independent examiners you appointed. Hadrian shot back. Using evidence you controlled. Enough. Victoria's voice cut through the chaos. Your Majesty, you cannot throw around accusations of murder without proof, and you cannot expect this council to accept testimony from an Omega who may be compromised by her relationship with you. There is no relationship, I said. My voice sounded thin compared to theirs, but I forced it steady. I barely know His Majesty. I've spoken to him once since arriving here. Once in 7 days? Marcus raised an eyebrow. And yet he paid $200,000 for you. Forgive our skepticism. Hadrian moved, placing himself more directly between me and the council. This session is over. You've made your accusations. If you have actual evidence of impropriety, present it formally. Otherwise, stop wasting everyone's time. We have evidence, Victoria said quietly. Or rather, we have questions that require answers. Questions about your father's research, Isla. She was looking at me now. Everyone was. My father's research is already submitted as evidence, I said. You've had access to it for 2 months. We have access to what His Majesty provided. But we've been investigating as well, and we found something interesting in the old archive logs. She produced another document. 3 weeks before his death, your father checked out a specific set of records. Treaty documents from the territorial wars. He never returned them. My mind raced. I remembered those documents. My father had brought them home, spent entire nights reviewing them. He was killed before he could return them, I said. Perhaps. Or perhaps he found something else. Something beyond the Omega Protection Statute. Something that threatened more than just our policies. Victoria descended several steps, moving closer to the platform. Where are those documents, Ela? I don't know. Everything burned in the fire. Everything? How convenient. It wasn't convenient. It was murder. I stood, unable to sit while she loomed above me. You killed them because they found the forgery. And now you're trying to discredit me before I can testify to what they discovered. We didn't kill anyone, Marcus said. But we are beginning to wonder if His Majesty's interest in you is purely about justice, or if there's something else at play, something personal. Hadrian laughed. It was a harsh sound, devoid of humor. You're accusing me of corruption? That's bold, even for you. We're suggesting that the situation is more complex than you've presented, Edmund said. He'd remained seated, but his voice carried authority the others lacked. An Alpha King purchasing an Omega under questionable circumstances, housing her intimately, then using her as a weapon against his own council. It raises questions. Then let's answer them publicly, Hadrian said. At the hearing, under oath, with full transparency, unless you're afraid of what that transparency might reveal. The 3 council members exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them. Very well, Victoria said. We'll proceed with the hearing as scheduled, but we'll also be conducting our own investigation into your relationship with this Omega. If we find evidence that she's been coerced or manipulated into providing false testimony, the consequences will be severe. Investigate whatever you want. Hadrian gestured toward the door. This session is over. Everyone leave except council leadership. People began filing out. I started to follow, but Hadrian's hand caught my arm. Not you. Stay. Maren hesitated at the stairs, looking back at me. Hadrian nodded once. She left. The room emptied until only the 6 of us remained. Hadrian, myself, and the 3 council members. The space felt larger with fewer people. The windows suddenly more prominent. I could see the forest stretching in all directions. Feel the height of the room in my bones. Let me make something very clear, Hadrian said. His voice was quiet now, controlled. I don't care what stories you tell yourselves about my motivations. I don't care if you believe I'm corrupt, or if you think I'm using this Omega for political gain. What I care about is the truth. And the truth is that you falsified legal documents, used those documents to consolidate power, and murdered 2 people who discovered your corruption. You have no proof of murder, Edmund said. Not yet. But I will. Hadrian released my arm, moved toward the council members. Here's what's going to happen. The hearing will proceed in 2 weeks. Isla will testify about her father's research. I'll present the evidence of forgery, and you 3 will answer questions under oath about your knowledge of and involvement in that forgery. And if we refuse? Marcus asked. Then I'll invoke royal authority and have you removed from the council pending criminal investigation. Your choice. Victoria's expression remained calm, but something flickered in her eyes. You're playing a dangerous game, Your Majesty. So are you. He turned back to me. Come on, we're leaving. I followed him up the stairs and out of the council hall. Neither of us spoke until we were back in the western study with the door closed. That was a setup, I said. Yes. They knew you'd bring me. They planned the whole thing to discredit us before the hearing. Yes. And you let them. He poured water from a pitcher on his desk, drank it slowly. I needed to see how they'd attack. Now I know. They're going to claim you're compromised. That your testimony is biased because of your relationship with me. We don't have a relationship. They don't care about truth. They care about reasonable doubt. If they can make the hearing attendees question your credibility, they can dismiss the evidence regardless of how solid it is. He set the glass down. We need to address this. How? By making our actual arrangement transparent. You're not my companion. You're not my lover. You're a protected witness who I purchased to keep alive long enough to testify. That's the truth, and we need to make it undeniable. They'll still twist it. Probably, but we can make it harder. He moved to the window, stared out at the same forest I'd been watching all week. There's something else. Something Victoria mentioned about the treaty documents your father checked out. I remember them. He brought them home, studied them for weeks. What was he looking for? I don't know. He never said. Just that they were connected to the Omega Protection Statute somehow, that the forgery's timing coincided with something in the treaties. Hadrian turned. Do you remember which treaties specifically? I closed my eyes, trying to recall. My father's desk, covered in old papers, his handwriting in the margins, the Northern Alliance Agreement of 1869, and something about border definitions from 1871, right after the statute was forged. Hadrian's jaw tightened. The Northern Alliance Agreement was what united the 16 packs under single rule. It established the council structure, defined territorial boundaries, and the forgery made it easier to relocate Omegas during territorial disputes, I said slowly. Which means the forgery might not have been just about Omegas. It might have been about controlling territory itself. He moved to his desk, began pulling out maps. If you can relocate Omegas freely during disputes, you can effectively clear land without having to negotiate with households. You can reshape borders without resistance. The implications crystallized. They used Omega relocation to steal land. Over decades, small parcels, strategic locations, always with legal justification because the law allowed it. He spread a map across his desk, and every time they did it, they consolidated power, made themselves indispensable. Created a system where questioning them meant questioning the entire territorial structure. I stared at the map, at the borders between packs, at the small notations marking disputed regions. My father found this, I whispered. That's why they killed him, not just because of the forgery, but because he understood what it was used for. Yes. Hadrian looked at me, really looked at me, not as a witness or a strategy, but as a person carrying the weight of understanding something terrible. And now you understand it too, which makes you even more dangerous to them than I thought. The room felt colder. I wrapped my arms around myself. The hearing, I said. They won't let it happen. Not if this is what's at stake. They'll try to stop it. That's why we need to be ready. He rolled up the map. And that's why you can't stay isolated anymore. You need to learn how to defend yourself. Not physically, politically. You need to understand how they'll attack so you can counter it. How? By meeting the people who survived them. He moved toward the door. Come with me. Where? To meet the others in the East Wing. The other dangerous things I keep here. We climbed the tower stairs, passing my floor and continuing upward. The footsteps I'd heard every night. They'd been coming from up here, the third level of the East Wing, accessible only by a narrow staircase that Hadrian unlocked with a key he wore on a chain around his neck. The corridor at the top was shorter than mine. Only 3 doors. Hadrian stopped at the middle one and knocked twice. It's me, he said. I'm bringing someone in. A pause. Then a woman's voice, wary. Who? Isla Merrick. Another pause, longer this time. I heard movement inside, furniture scraping against floor. Then the door opened. The woman standing there was maybe 40, with dark hair shot through with gray and eyes that assessed me in a single sweep. She wore practical clothing similar to mine, and her hands bore the kind of scars that came from years of physical work. This is the one? She asked Hadrian. This is her? Isla? This is Calla Thorne. The surname hit me like cold water. Thorne. Like Edmund Thorne, the council member who'd stood in the hall and denied everything. Calla saw my reaction and smiled bitterly. Yes. That Thorne. I'm Edmund's daughter, or I was, before he disowned me for refusing to marry the alpha he'd chosen. She stepped back from the door. Come in. If you're here, it means things are worse than I thought. The room was larger than mine, arranged more like an apartment than quarters. A sitting area, a sleeping space partitioned by a screen, shelves filled with books and papers, maps covered one entire wall. The same kind Hadrian had been studying, marked with dates and notations. Calla has been helping me trace the pattern of territorial shifts, Hadrian explained. She has access to family records that were never officially archived. Access meaning I stole them when I left, Calla corrected. She gestured for me to sit. My father kept duplicate records of everything. Didn't trust the council archives. Didn't trust anyone, actually. When I escaped his house 15 years ago, I took everything I could carry. Escaped? I asked. He wanted me to bond with Victor Ashlyn, Victoria's nephew, a strategic alliance between families. I was 22 and terrified, so I ran. His Majesty found me half dead in the forest 3 days later and brought me here. She glanced at Hadrian. I've been in this room ever since. By choice, Hadrian added. She's free to leave whenever she wants. I'm free to die whenever I want, Calla said flatly. My father made it clear what happens to daughters who embarrass him. This room is safety. Leaving is suicide. I looked between them, trying to understand. So you've been here 15 years? Just studying maps? Among other things, I help manage the estate archives, organize historical documents, train new staff on record-keeping protocols. She poured tea from a pot that sat on a small table. And I help His Majesty understand how my father and his colleagues have been manipulating territorial law for decades. She handed me a cup. The tea was still hot, fragrant with herbs I didn't recognize. Your father's research, Calla continued, sitting across from me. I read it when His Majesty first received it. Garrett was meticulous. The forgery he found was just the beginning. Did he ever mention the pattern of territorial adjustments that followed? I shook my head. He died before he could explain everything. The forgery was inserted around 1869, Calla said. Within 5 years, 12 territorial disputes were settled using the new language. Omegas were relocated. Land was redistributed. In every single case, the redistribution favored packs whose alphas had connections to council members. She stood and moved to the wall of maps. Her finger traced lines I couldn't follow from where I sat. My father, Victoria, and Marcus didn't just corrupt one law, they built an entire system. The forgery was the foundation, but they added to it over time. Procedural rules, documentation requirements, things that sound administrative but actually create barriers to challenging their decisions. A bureaucratic maze, Hadrian said. Nearly impossible to navigate unless you know the exact path through. And anyone who tries gets lost or gives up, Calla finished. Or, in your parents' case, dies. The tea was bitter on my tongue. Why are you telling me this? Because you're going to testify in 2 weeks. And when you do, they're going to try to destroy you the same way they destroyed your father. Not with fire this time, with procedure, with questions about your credibility, with insinuations about your relationship with His Majesty. Calla returned to her seat. I've spent 15 years watching them operate. I know how they think. I can help you prepare. Why would you help me? You're his daughter. Was his daughter. And helping you is helping everyone who's been crushed under the system he built. She set down her cup. Do you know how many Omegas have been forcibly relocated in the past 30 years? 417. I have the records. 417 families torn apart because the law allowed it. Because 3 people decided their power was worth more than other people's lives. Her voice had gone sharp. Hadrian placed a hand on her shoulder briefly. A gesture of comfort that spoke to years of familiarity. Calla's testimony will support yours at the hearing, he said. She can speak to the pattern. Provide documentation that corroborates your father's findings. But she's been in hiding for 15 years, I said. Won't that make her credibility questionable too? Less questionable than yours, apparently. Calla's smile was knife-thin. I'm Edmund Thorne's estranged daughter. That makes me a hostile witness with intimate knowledge of his methods. The council can attack my motives, but they can't dismiss the documents I've preserved. Hadrian moved toward the door. There's one more person you should meet, the other occupant of this floor. We left Calla's room and walked to the end of the corridor. Hadrian knocked on the last door, quieter this time. Owen, you awake? Unfortunately. The voice from inside was male, younger than I expected, with an edge of exhaustion. Hadrian opened the door without waiting for permission. The room was darker than Calla's, curtains drawn against the afternoon light. A figure sat at a desk covered in papers, illuminated by a single lamp. When he turned, I saw he was maybe 30, with sandy hair and the kind of pale complexion that came from not seeing enough sun. Owen Valen, Hadrian introduced. Marcus Valen's son. Also in voluntary exile for the past 8 years, Owen stood slowly, like movement hurt. Voluntary is generous. I prefer functionally imprisoned for my own protection. What happened? I asked. Owen laughed, but there was no humor in it. I was training to be a lawyer, specializing in territorial law, because that's what Valens do. During my research, I found the same discrepancies your father did. Not all of them, but enough to start asking questions. My father suggested I stop asking. I didn't. 3 days later, I was attacked walking home from the law library. 4 men, no faces. They broke 6 ribs, my left arm in 2 places, and told me to forget what I'd found or they'd come back and finish the job. He moved into the light. I could see scars now, faint lines along his jaw and neck. His Majesty's guards found me and brought me here, Owen continued. I've been here ever since, documenting everything I can find about the council's corruption. I can't practice law anymore. My father made sure I was disbarred for mental instability, but I can still research, still build cases, still make myself useful. Useful for what? I asked. For the criminal charges that will come after the hearing. Hadrian leaned against the doorframe. Exposing the forgery is step 1. Step 2 is prosecuting everyone involved. Owen's been preparing that case for years. Owen gestured to the papers covering his desk. Every territorial dispute decided using the corrupted statute. Every Omega relocated without proper cause. Every piece of land redistributed under false legal pretense. I have documentation for all of it. Names, dates, decisions. When the forgery is proven, this all becomes evidence of systematic fraud. And murder, I added, and murder. Though proving that will be harder. He sat back down, wincing slightly. But we have something they don't expect. We have witnesses who survived them. You, me, Calla. We're supposed to be dead or silenced or too afraid to speak. Instead, we're here, together, building the case that will end them. I looked at the three of them, Calla in her room of maps, Owen in his archive of evidence, Hadrian standing between them like a bridge. This was what the East Wing really was. Not a prison or a collection point for dangerous things. A sanctuary. A place where the people the council had tried to erase could survive long enough to fight back. How many others are there? I asked Hadrian. In the East Wing? Just you three. But throughout the estate, dozens. People who came here because they had nowhere else to go. People the system destroyed, or tried to destroy. He straightened. This is what they're really afraid of. Not the forgery itself. Not even the legal consequences. They're afraid that if the truth comes out, everyone will see what they've done. How many lives they've ruined. How fragile their power actually is. So the hearing isn't just about proving the forgery, I said slowly. It's about showing everyone that resistance is possible. Exactly. Hadrian moved back into the corridor. Which is why they're going to fight harder than you can imagine. Why they'll use every tool at their disposal to discredit you. Why we need to be absolutely prepared. We descended the stairs together. My mind was racing, trying to absorb everything I'd learned. The scope of the corruption was larger than I'd understood. This wasn't about one law or one forgery. It was about an entire system built on lies, sustained through violence and intimidation. When we reached my floor, Hadrian stopped. The next 2 weeks will be intensive, he said. Calla will help you understand the council's tactics. Owen will prepare you for cross-examination. I'll work with you on the broader strategy. You won't have much time alone. Good, I said. I'm tired of being alone. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. Get some rest tonight. We start tomorrow at dawn. He turned to leave, but I stopped him with a question that had been building since the council hall. Why did you really buy me? He looked back. I told you. To preserve a witness. That's strategy. I'm asking about the real reason. For a long moment, he didn't answer. The corridor was quiet, just the two of us in the fading afternoon light. Because, he said finally, I failed to protect your parents. I didn't know about the investigation until it was too late. Didn't realize what the council was capable of until they were already dead. When I found out you were being sent to auction, I saw a chance to not fail again, to save one person from a system that destroys people for telling the truth. He met my eyes. Is that reason enough? It was the most honest thing he'd said to me. No calculation. No political maneuvering. Just guilt and determination wound together. Yes, I said, that's reason enough. He nodded once and left. I entered my room and closed the door. The space felt different now. Not a cell. Not isolation. Just a room in a building full of people who understood what it meant to survive. I sat at the desk and pulled out fresh paper. Started writing again, but this time not memories, facts, dates. Everything I could remember about my father's research. Everything Calla and Owen had shared. I wrote until my hand cramped and the light failed and Marin knocked to deliver dinner. You look different, she said, setting the tray down. Different how? Less afraid. She paused at the door. The others told me what happened at the council hall today. What Victoria tried to do. I'm sorry you had to face that. It's not over yet. No. But you're not alone in it anymore. She smiled slightly. That matters more than you might think. After she left, I ate. Actually ate, for the first time in days. The food tasted real, instead of like obligation. I finished every bite. Then I returned to my desk and kept writing. Building my own archive. My own case. My own piece of the resistance that was forming in this strange sanctuary, disguised as an estate. Somewhere above, I heard footsteps. Owen or Calla, pacing through their own preparations. We were scattered across different floors, different rooms, but connected by the same purpose. The council had tried to erase us. Instead, they'd created exactly what they feared most. Witnesses who wouldn't stay silent. I wrote until midnight, until exhaustion pulled me toward sleep. But before I lay down, I walked to the window one more time. The forest was dark now, just shapes against darker sky, but I knew it was there. Knew it stretched for miles in every direction. Knew somewhere beyond it were the territories where 417 Omegas had been relocated, where countless others had been crushed under laws designed to protect power instead of people. My father had tried to fix this alone. He'd failed, not because he was wrong, but because he'd been outnumbered. We weren't outnumbered anymore. I pressed my palm against the glass and made a silent promise to everyone the council had destroyed. To my parents. To the relocated Omegas. To Calla and Owen, and every other person who'd survived long enough to remember. 2 weeks. Then we'd stand in that council hall and tell the truth. And this time, they wouldn't be able to silence us. The 2 weeks dissolved into a blur of preparation that felt simultaneously endless and too short. Calla taught me to recognize verbal traps, the ways council members would phrase questions to make any answer sound incriminating. Owen drilled me on legal terminology, on staying precise under pressure, on never volunteering information beyond what was asked. Hadrian worked with me on composure, how to stand, where to look, how to channel fear into clarity instead of letting it show as weakness. We worked in Owen's room mostly. The three of us gathered around his desk while Hadrian paced and asked increasingly hostile questions, mock cross-examinations that left me shaking and furious, and gradually ready. "They'll try to make you cry," Calla said on day 9. "Emotional Omegas fit their narrative. Stay calm no matter what they say. They'll twist your words," Owen added. "Answer only what's asked. Don't explain. Don't justify. Just facts. And when they accuse you of lying," Hadrian said, his voice cold in the way he'd used during practice, "look directly at them and repeat the truth. Don't defend. Don't argue. Just state it again." By day 13, I could hold my composure through anything they threw at me. By day 14, I was angry enough to want the hearing to happen. Angry at the council for what they'd done. Angry at the system that had allowed it. Angry at myself for every moment I'd spent, afraid instead of furious. On the morning of the hearing, I woke before dawn and found a package outside my door. Inside was formal clothing, gray and black, severe and professional. A note in Hadrian's handwriting. "You're not on trial. Remember that." I dressed carefully, braided my hair tight enough to hurt, looked at myself in the mirror, and saw someone who looked older than 23. Someone who'd survived an auction and isolation and preparation that felt like its own kind of battle. Someone ready. Marin arrived exactly at sunrise. "The motor coach leaves in 20 minutes. His Majesty is waiting downstairs." The council hall was already full when we arrived. More people than had attended the emergency session. PAC representatives from all 16 territories, legal observers, even citizens who'd somehow secured seats in the upper galleries. The air buzzed with anticipation and tension. Hadrian led me to a seat near the front, in a section reserved for witnesses. Calla was already there, looking calm in a way I knew was carefully constructed. Owen sat beside her, his scarred hands folded on the table in front of him. "They're all here," Calla murmured, nodding toward the council section. Edmund, Victoria, and Marcus sat together, flanked by their own legal advisors. They looked confident, prepared, like they'd already won. The session was called to order by a neutral arbitrator, an elderly alpha from the Western Territories brought in specifically because he had no ties to our council. He explained the format. Hadrian would present evidence, the council could respond, witnesses would testify, questions would be asked, then the judgment would be rendered. His Majesty, Alpha King Hadrian Morven, you may begin. Hadrian stood. He'd dressed formally too, the northern crest prominent at his collar. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the room. This hearing concerns the Omega Protection Statute of 1847, specifically Section 7 regarding autonomous rights during territorial disputes. I'm presenting evidence that this statute was deliberately altered sometime between 1847 and 1870, and that this alteration has been used for decades to justify illegal land seizure and forced relocation. He presented my father's research first. Original documents compared with later versions, the forgery visible once you knew where to look. He displayed them on large screens so everyone could see the differences. The handwriting that didn't quite match, the ink composition slightly wrong, the insertion points obvious under magnification. The room was silent. People leaned forward. The evidence was undeniable. Victoria stood when he finished. These documents prove nothing except that Garrett Merrick had theories. Theories that have never been verified by independent experts. For all we know, these originals are themselves forgeries created to support a false narrative. Then you won't object to independent analysis, Hadrian said smoothly. I've arranged for 3 separate document experts to examine both sets. Their reports are available for review. He distributed folders. Victoria's confidence flickered. Witness testimony, the arbitrator said. Isla Merrick. I stood. Walked to the center platform. Every eye in the room followed me. I'd practiced this moment 100 times in Owen's room, but nothing had prepared me for the weight of actual attention, for knowing that what I said next would either validate my father's death or reduce it to meaningless tragedy. I placed my hand on the oath stone and swore to tell the truth. Miss Merrick, the arbitrator began, please describe your father's research in your own words. I did. Slowly. Precisely. Explaining how he'd noticed the discrepancy, how he'd traced the forgery, how he'd documented everything. I spoke about his methods, his thoroughness, his belief in proper procedure. And what happened when he brought this to the council? The arbitrator asked. He died. My voice didn't shake. 3 days after submitting his findings privately to council leadership, our house burned. Both my parents died. The investigation ruled it accidental, but the timing suggests otherwise. Edmund stood. Suggests, suspects, theories. This is all speculation based on grief and circumstance. It's based on a pattern, I said, looking directly at him. The same pattern that led to your daughter fleeing your house and hiding for 15 years. The same pattern that led to your colleague's son being beaten nearly to death for asking questions. The same pattern that has destroyed anyone who threatens council power. The room erupted. The arbitrator called for order. Edmund's face had gone red. You dare, he started. I dare tell the truth, I said. That's what this hearing is for. Calla testified next. She presented her stolen documents, the records of territorial adjustments that followed the forgery. She spoke clinically, without emotion, letting the facts build their own damning narrative. When Edmund tried to dismiss her testimony as biased, she simply quoted his own correspondence back to him, letters where he'd discussed clearing obstacles and managing Omega complications. Owen went last. Despite his injuries, despite the fear I could see in the tightness around his eyes, he presented his case with the precision of the lawyer he'd been trained to be. He listed every illegal relocation, every falsified claim, every life destroyed by a law that should never have existed in its corrupted form. By the time he finished, the room felt different, heavier. Like the weight of truth had changed the atmospheric pressure, the council's defense was exactly what we'd prepared for. They questioned our credibility, suggested we were coordinated in our lies, implied that Hadrian had manipulated us for political gain. Victoria even brought up the auction again, trying to paint me as compromised. Miss Merrick was purchased by His Majesty for $200,000 and housed in intimate quarters, she said. How can we trust her testimony when she's so clearly dependent on him? I'm dependent on truth, I said before anyone could object. His Majesty bought me because I would have disappeared into the auction system otherwise. He housed me safely because the council that killed my parents would have found a way to silence me permanently. And yes, I want the forgery exposed. Not because I'm manipulated, because it's right. Convenient, Victoria said. True, I countered. The arbitrator called a recess. We filed out of the hall into an antechamber. Hadrian paced while Calla and Owen sat in exhausted silence. I stood at the window, watching storm clouds gather over the forest. "How long do you think?" Owen asked. "Could be hours," Hadrian said. "Could be days. Judgment this significant takes time." It took 4 hours. When we were called back, the room felt different, expectant. The arbitrator sat with a folder in front of him, expression unreadable. "This council has reviewed all evidence presented," he began. "Examined documents, heard testimony, considered arguments from both sides. The judgment is as follows." The room held its breath. "The evidence of forgery is conclusive. The Omega Protection Statute of 1847, Section 7, was deliberately altered between 1847 and 1870. This alteration was not authorized, not documented through proper channels, and constitutes fraud against the Northern Territory's legal system." Relief hit me so hard I had to grip the table edge. "Furthermore," the arbitrator continued, "the pattern of territorial adjustments following this forgery suggests systematic abuse of the corrupted statute. While this hearing cannot determine criminal guilt, it can and does recommend immediate investigation into council members Edmund Thorne, Victoria Ashland, and Marcus Valen for their potential involvement in and benefit from said abuse." Edmund shot to his feet. "This is outrageous. You're condemning us based on circumstantial—" "I'm recommending investigation based on documented evidence," the arbitrator cut him off, "which is exactly what proper procedure demands. The same procedure you claim to uphold." He looked at Hadrian. "Your Majesty, the council recommends that the corrupted statute be immediately nullified and the original language restored. All territorial decisions made under the corrupted version should be reviewed and, where appropriate, reversed. 417 families. 417 chances for justice. Additionally, all property seized under the corrupted statute's authority should be returned to rightful owners or their heirs. My family's house, my parents' possessions, everything the council had taken. This hearing is concluded. Formal criminal investigation will begin immediately under independent oversight from the Western Territories. The gavel fell. The room exploded into noise. People shouting, arguing, some cheering. I sat frozen, unable to process that it was over, that we'd won, that my father's research had been vindicated. Hadrian's hand on my shoulder brought me back. "Come on, we need to leave before this gets worse." We exited through a side door, avoiding the crowd. Calla and Owen followed close behind. Outside, the storm had broken. Rain fell in sheets, soaking us in seconds. I didn't care. I tilted my face up and let it wash over me, cold and clean and real. "Isla." Hadrian had to raise his voice over the rain. "We need to talk." We gathered in the motor coach, all 4 of us dripping onto the leather seats. The driver pulled away from the council hall, heading back toward Thornridge. "They'll appeal," Owen said. "Try to drag this out." "Let them," Hadrian replied. "The judgment is public record now. Everyone knows. Even if they delay criminal charges, their power is broken." "And the Omegas?" I asked. "The ones who were relocated. Review process starts immediately. It'll take time, but they'll have the chance to reclaim what was taken." He looked at me. "Including you." The words hung between us. I could reclaim my family's property. Could leave Thornridge. Could build a life somewhere else, away from council politics and alpha kings and everything that had consumed the past months. Could leave. "What about the criminal investigation?" I asked instead. "That's separate. The Western Territories will handle it. Could take years." Hadrian leaned back in his seat. "But it'll happen. Edmund, Victoria, and Marcus will answer for what they've done." "Will it be enough?" Calla asked quietly. "Answering for it?" "No," Hadrian said. "Nothing will be enough for the lives they destroyed. But it's something. It's justice, even if it's incomplete." We rode in silence for a while. The rain continued, turning the world outside into gray blur. "What happens to us now?" Owen asked. "To those of us in the East Wing, whatever you want," Hadrian said. "You're not prisoners. Never were. You're free to stay or leave as you choose." I looked at Calla and Owen. They looked at each other. Some silent communication passed between them. "I think," Calla said slowly, I'd like to help with the review process. I know how to read the records, know which relocations were legitimate and which were fabricated. I could make a difference. You will, Hadrian agreed. And I'd like to practice law again, Owen said. Represent the families going through review. Help them navigate the system properly. I'll see about getting your disbarment overturned, Hadrian said. Shouldn't be difficult now. They both looked at me. I don't know what I want, I admitted. I've spent so long just surviving. I don't know what comes after. Time, Hadrian said. That's what comes after. Time to figure it out. We reached Thornridge as the storm began to clear. The estate looked different somehow. Less like a fortress, more like just a building. We went inside separately, Calla and Owen to their rooms, Hadrian to his study, me to mine. I stood in the center of my room, dripping rainwater onto the floor, and tried to feel victorious. We'd won. We'd exposed the truth. We'd started the process of justice. But my parents were still dead. 417 families were still scattered. 15 years of Calla's life were still gone. Owen's body still bore scars. Victory didn't undo damage. It just stopped new damage from happening. A knock at the door. I opened it to find Hadrian standing there, changed into dry clothes. Walk with me, he said. We went down to the estate grounds, following paths through the forest. The rain had stopped, but everything still dripped. The air smelled like wet earth and pine. Your father would be proud, Hadrian said after a while. Would he? I asked. He wanted to fix this quietly, through proper channels. Instead, it took a public hearing and criminal investigation. He started it. You finished it. That's worth being proud of. We reached a clearing where a stream cut through the trees. Hadrian sat on a fallen log. I sat beside him. I need to apologize, he said. For what? For using you. For buying you like a strategy piece instead of seeing you as a person who'd already lost everything. He picked up a stone, turned it over in his hands. You were right to question my motives. I did this for justice, but I also did it for myself, to prove I could fight the council, to show that their corruption didn't define my kingdom. And now you've proven it, have I? Or have I just created a different system where the Alpha King still holds too much power? He threw the stone into the stream. Your father discovered that laws could be corrupted. I've discovered that even fighting corruption requires power that could itself be corrupted. So what do? Build accountability, transparency, make sure what happened can't happen again. He looked at me. And listen to people who tell me when I'm wrong. People like you. I'm not staying, I said. The words came out before I'd fully decided, but once spoken, I knew they were true. I need to go back, to where my house was. See if anything's left worth salvaging, I understand. But I'll help with the review process. Like Calla, I owe that to the families. You don't owe anyone anything. I owe my father, and myself. I stood. When can I leave? Whenever you're ready. I'll arrange transport. He stood too. But Isla, you'll always have a place here, if you need it. I know. We walked back to the estate in comfortable silence. The sun was breaking through clouds, turning everything gold. 3 days later, I left Thornridge in a motor coach, packed with my few belongings and copies of all the hearing documents. Calla hugged me goodbye. Owen shook my hand and promised to represent my family's property claim personally. Marin gave me a bag of food for the journey. Hadrian walked me to the vehicle. Thank you, I said, for everything. Even the parts I hated. You're welcome. Even for those parts. He smiled slightly. Be safe, Isla Merrick. You too, Your Majesty. The ride back took the same 4 hours as the first journey, but in reverse. I watched the landscape change from forest to city, from wild to structured. When we reached the district where my family's house had stood, I asked the driver to stop. The lot was still there. Burned foundation, scorched earth. But also new growth, weeds pushing through cracks, flowers I didn't recognize blooming in the ruins. I stood in what used to be our kitchen and closed my eyes, tried to remember how it felt before. The smell of bread, my mother's laugh, my father's voice reading aloud from old documents. They were gone. But what they'd fought for wasn't. I opened my eyes and saw the forest beyond the city edge. Saw the northern territories stretching endlessly. Saw a kingdom beginning the slow work of repairing itself. My father had asked one question: is this law correct? That question had cost him everything, but it had also changed everything. I knelt and placed my hand on the scorched foundation, made a promise to the ghosts that lingered here. We won, I told them. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to start rebuilding. I stood and walked back to the motor coach. The driver waited patiently. "Where to now, miss?" I thought about Thornridge, about Calla's maps and Owen's case files and Hadrian's study full of books, about all the work that remained, 417 families to contact, records to review, justice to pursue. "Back to the estate," I said.